Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pretty excited because we're about to run a talk show style panel. We're going to introduce a few speakers. We're going to meet them. We're going to ask them a few questions. We got a bit of a commentary. And then we want you to ask the hard questions of them. Questions of topic, question of relevance, questions of our time. But I want to introduce our first panelist. His name is James. He's a professor. He was awarded with a Prime Ministerial Lecturer of the Year. They gave him a tiara. Would you please welcome him to the stage, James Avril. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Great to have you here, James.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Whoa. Awesome.
You are Lecturer of the Year.
Yeah.
How good must your classes be? What do you do? What's your secret?
Yeah, I'll go and say quickly about that. When I went to win the award, I was sitting there at this dinner. It was like the Academy Awards, and they opened up this envelope, and they're about to announce the winner from this Academy Awards moment. And I was with my girlfriend, and they're reading about this person who won this award, and I'm listening, and I'm going, "Wow, that person sounds so cool." And then my girlfriend leans over and she goes, "Oh my God, you're good, but you're not as good as whoever he is." And it was me, so it was pretty exciting. Look, the most important thing about teaching for me is to make it really, really exciting, to make it practical, to make knowledge something that is not out there or something that's not to be challenged. It's supposed to be brought in here and you play with it and you challenge it and you throw the bits out that don't work for you and you make it applicable to every person in the room.
And you care about citizenship, don't you? That's a big focus in your research. Do we get it right?
Yeah, no, we don't. so yeah, I mean, I really care about citizenship, and mostly my focus is on young people in citizenship. And one of the areas I'm really interested in is how young people are involved in all these kind of different forms of engagement and citizenship and activism and this and that, and how lots of federal government organisations and formal and corporations don't know how to communicate with them. And so there's this mismatch. It's almost like they're speaking two different languages. And so one of the interesting things is to try and think to yourself, well, how do you learn to bridge that gap? And so one of the things I do at my uni is because, like universities are institutions as well, and often they historically haven't been particularly great at doing that. And so one of the things I do with my uni is go, well, how do we better communicate with students? How do we get their input? And so, in some of my classes, I actually have live feedback. So there's times in my class where I will stop a lecture because students are telling me that they don't get what I'm doing. So I will stop it and then walk out and then start the lecture again.
It sounds like exactly the kind of lecture I wanted to be part of.
Yeah, you should come along, yeah.
Well, we're going to hear more about citizenship in just a second. We're going to welcome up our next panelist who is busted out of South Africa and has never stopped shattering ceilings since. Would you please welcome a great friend of the Halogen Foundation, Avril Henry.
Hello.
How are you? Good to see you. Avril, you've been a great friend of the Halogen Foundation for ages.
Yeah, I think this is my 5th year involved in Halogen and every capital city. And it's so cool because I love all young people. So, hi everyone.
Now, you came out of South Africa at a really tough time.
I, at university, was an anti-apartheid activist. I didn't believe that it was right. The security police used to tear gas our university. There were only 2 universities in South Africa that didn't get government funding. One was the University of Cape Town and one was Wits University in Johannesburg. And the reason we didn't get government funding was because we were the 2 universities which allowed coloured and Indian students to study there. And so they would come and tear gas our university while we were writing exams.
For believing in equality.
Yeah. And my parents, I grew up in a country town, had different political views to me. So by the way, I'm not advocating this to anyone in the room, but I did emigrate to Australia when I was 21 without telling my parents.
But your story doesn't end there, does it? I mean, it's an amazing story. You've gone on to be a huge influence in corporations. You've broken barriers on boards there. You even had something to do with our friend, a general who we saw recently.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and I have to say I'm probably as excited as everyone in the room today to have heard General Morrison speak, because I'm currently the Chief Advisor to General Morrison on gender and diversity, and I've worked with the Army over the last couple of months on rewriting their values and establishing what is and is not acceptable behaviour.
Well, it's an amazing time to be in that role, and I think we
yeah.
can hear from his values, which came out today so incredibly well,
Yeah.
that General Morrison has been
Yeah.
very well advised.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
So thank you, Avril. We're about to meet our next panelist. Probably needs no introduction because you've heard him on the airwaves. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage an incredible reporter from Triple J's Hack. It's Tom Tilley.
Thank you very much, Murray.
How you doing?
Very well.
Good to have you here, Tom. You share a unique similarity between all three of you on stage, actually. You've been in corporate banking.
I have a dirty past as well as these two other guests here. Yeah, when I left high school, I wasn't sure what to do, and I always wanted to be a journalist. When I was in high school, did work experience at a radio station and 2 newspapers during high school, and then my dad put the fear of financial insecurity into me just before I left school. He's like, I think you should do something more solid than journalism, Tom. You can earn some better money. You don't want to be unemployed. It's like, that makes sense, Dad. So I did a commerce degree at Macquarie University, and I was so scared of failing that I studied like an absolute nerd, sat in the front row for every single lecture, and ended up getting really good marks. So an investment bank offered me a job. I was like, wow, I'm not going to be unemployed. This is fantastic. And then I got into the job, and I used some very politically careful language when I resigned. I said, look, I just don't think this workplace is socially dynamic enough for me. I'm going to have to move on and pursue other things.
Now, you went into the media, and you were telling me just earlier, you rose through the ranks at the ABC. You didn't start off with an incredible position.
Yeah, well, when I left banking, it was like the first time in my life I kind of had no direction. Like at school, everything had been very smoothly. I grew up in a country town of 7,000 people, and we didn't even have a McDonald's. That inequality was solved.
It was real and true.
In my mid-high school years. But yeah, everything had gone very smoothly, and suddenly I was there at the age of 23 with no idea what to do next, no real career plan, and even struggling for a kind of a sense of identity about who I was, because it's hard once you leave school. Like, you don't know who you are in this big, vast world. It's not like a high school where everyone knows who you are. They know your strengths, your weaknesses, your embarrassing things, your family, everything about you. And suddenly you're into this world where you're just another face on the street. And so they were kind of hard years. And so eventually I ended up going onto the dole, which was, you know, a high point in my life, walking into Centrelink and going, all right, bring it on, $200 a week, let's do it.
You kept going, you kept in the media, and
yeah, I ended up working for this guy for $50 a day, producing his documentaries. He had a documentary that he was making independently for SBS, and slowly got some experience with him. Slowly I was earning more money and less dole payments, and going to the Centrelink less. Which was a shame because there's some wonderful characters that turn up to Centrelink in Redfern. Yeah.
And it's funny because in each of your journeys, I think you've actually gone from one career and then launched yourself into the next. All of you who I know now, with a sense of justice, with a sense of citizenship, with a sense of breaking down those boundaries for equality. I think it's going to be a good panel. I'm pretty excited.
I hope so.
Well, we have a chance to ask questions. We're going to talk a little bit first. There's a couple of questions I've got, and then we'd love your questions. We'd love your questions on their paths, their journeys. If you've got a question for an individual or the whole panel, we'd love to hear it. But first, I want to get started. There was a campaign out of Kentucky where this girls' school said, they put up these posters saying, "You're not a princess. Prepare for the real world. Come to Mercy College." I mean, that was their campaign, and it went viral. It went crazy over the internet, trying to challenge this expectation that your life is going to be amazing. You will have a fairy tale finish for it. Avril, do you think we tell students at high school that everything is going to be unbelievable?
Yeah, we do. And it's not just at high school. I think baby boomers, and you know, I put up my hand as a baby boomer parent, we actually tell our children from the minute they leave the womb, you're beautiful, you are handsome, you are clever, you are smart, you can do anything, you can be anything, you can go anywhere. The world is your oyster, and don't worry, darling, if you can't reach the oyster, mummy or daddy will go and get it for you. And in the school system, you know, I jokingly say that for the first time we've got Gen Ys as a generation where we don't talk about competition, we don't talk about failure. And as a generation, they were the first generation to get a ribbon for coming 7th in the egg and spoon race. And the reality is, older generations were told you come first, second or third, as you would understand from your father's story, and less than third, you're a loser. And we don't use that language anymore. And by the way, I don't advocate that we do, but I think that what we've lost is we have not helped young people today to understand how to deal with adversity and how to be resilient. And I'm all for optimism, and I'm all for encouraging people to be the best they can be, but we also have to help young people understand that when you fail, firstly, it's not a bad thing, it's a learning opportunity, and secondly, it's about perseverance, and the third thing is, what is it that you need to do to pick yourself up and start all over again? And that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, James, you come from a teaching background. Is the classroom a place where we don't encourage competitiveness anymore? Have we changed?
Yeah, look, I think there has been a change. I think, yeah, as Avril said, you've got to try and find that balance between encouraging a competitive nature, but also kind of not sitting there and staring at people and saying you're a loser. I think that's really important. I think resilience is this really interesting word that we need to kind of promote and kind of really get that we need to understand, so that people actually learn to bounce back from failure. And I think I think the secret here is, and what I try and tell the students in the classroom, is that success is not an end point. It's not only when you're on Triple J. It's a, you know, Tom. It's actually a whole bunch of processes, you know, and it takes, and it's a journey, right? And you should be looking at each step as a process in that journey. And you need to kind of understand that. And for me, like, you know, I have students who, you know, incredible. 60% of the university students at Uni of Western Sydney are first in family. And so even that's success. Just getting there is success, and you need to take moments to appreciate that. But you know, again, you don't want to sit there and stare at someone and say, well, you know, you're a failure. I mean, I was told that a lot when I was at school, and that saw me drop out at uni when I was quite young, because I was told that I wasn't, my dad's a builder, and I was the first member of my family to go to uni, and I was brought in at the end of year 12, at the end of the first year at uni, and the dean said to me, are you sure you should be doing this? Shouldn't you be doing the same thing as your dad?
Wow.
So, you know, and so for me, I mean, we don't want that either, you know what I mean? So it's kind of trying to find that balance.
Tom, I want to come to your story with that. Just quickly on that, Avril, though, you heard exactly the same thing, didn't you?
Yes.
At uni.
Yeah, I was at school when I did my subject selection in year 11 and 12, and I went to a co-ed school which was also bilingual. And at this school, most of the people in this room, except the teachers, won't understand the concept of shorthand. But before the internet, there was this thing called shorthand and typing before computers. And that's what girls did. Those were girls' subjects in year 11 and 12. And I selected 3-unit maths and 3-unit economics because I wanted to go to university. And I actually got called in by the principal, who asked me why I had picked economics and maths, because they were boys' subjects. And I said, well, I want to go to university. And he said, why? He said, what's wrong with being a bank teller or a nurse? And I said, I don't want to be a bank teller or a nurse. And he said, the problem with girls like you is that not only are you trouble, you're too big for your boots. Anyway, I went on to not only be dux of my school, I actually won a scholarship and went to uni.
I love those stories, right? Tom, I mean, for you, James was saying that success isn't an endpoint, it's a process, but if you're making $50 a week trying to survive, did that feel like success?
No, it didn't, and I didn't know what the end point would be, so that was really difficult. And I think the hard thing about this whole discussion is that you kind of need both messages growing up. Like, I think your high school years are this beautiful, almost like cocoon-like times where you should be pumped up with enthusiasm and, you know, good energy and all those hopes and dreams. That's beautiful. That's what childhood should be like. But you do need to know that it's not all about success and it's not all about those things. So I think, a bit like James was saying, it's about how you define success, and that actually it's about the way you do things and learning to be goal orientated, but not be completely blinded by goals. And you know, it's good to say like, enjoy the journey, dude. But what does that mean? Like, enjoying the journey means kind of finding the fun in every day and like the excitement of what you're doing every day. And I struggle with that with my job. Like, I've got my dream job now, and clearly, you know, I went through some times where it's really hard and I didn't know that it would turn out that way. But even now, I turn up to work on a Tuesday, Wednesday, it's kind of, oh my goodness, I've got to do hack again. Oh. And then I look at myself and go, what are you thinking? Like, this is exactly what you wanted. And so for me, it's still, even though I'm doing what I want to do, I still have to define success by enjoying it on a day-by-day level, because like, being able to have a business card that says presenter of hack is all well and good, and you know, you get to be on the radio. But if I'm not there each day enjoying it and coming off the show getting a kick out of what I'm doing, then that's not success.
Yeah. I was just going to quickly say, you know, one of the things I do now is I get to travel around the world, and I get invited to speak at universities. And I was invited to this university, and they had this subject, and it had its consistent 25% fail rate. And they said to me, oh, you know, we don't know what we're doing. You know, we're doing all these things. We're trying to promote students. Can you tell me what's wrong with this subject? And I said, I'll just go along. So I went to the first lecture, and the lecturer stood in front of the class and said, she stood up and she went, hi, my name is XYZ. And then she said, all right, I just want everyone to look at yourself and count 4 across, or 3 across. And everyone went, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then she went, all right, one of you 4 is going to fail. And then they had a 25% fail rate. And then it was just like, I think I've got, you know, and they'd spend all this money on consultants going through the subject outlines and this and that, but no one actually sat in the classroom with the students. And if you tell 25% of people they're going to fail, 25% are going to fail. So Tom's spot on, right? You need to kind of encourage people. And, you know, in my class, I look at everyone and say, you can all get a high distinction. You're not going to automatically get a high distinction, but if you try and you work and you study, I can guarantee you that you can all get a high distinction. And, you know, and like, yeah, my subjects are famous for having fail rates of 3%. And when I got the 3%, the university actually assessed the students that weren't failing, because they said, oh, are you know, dodging the marks up? And they were all fantastic, and it's because you know, people got into it.
But also, I mean, you're talking there about results. It's also, I think, we need to learn better how to define success along the way, and not to think too much about those endpoints, and like actually doing it. And like, say in my situation where I was lost between careers and not sure, like that's kind of cool in a way, because that's where like anything can happen, and the uncertainty of that period in your life is kind of beautiful in a like chaotic way. And I think we need to kind of, I don't know, change our values a little bit so that we embrace the chaos and the uncertainty, because that's often where the best ideas can happen, as opposed to sometimes being really locked into a framework and a pathway. So I think kind of, yeah, embracing the chaos and the uncertainty in situations where it's a little bit outside of your control is something I think we could all do better.
Avril?
There's a great story that I want to tell about Mr. Honda, who started the Honda motorcycle company. And I think it's a great story about perseverance and resilience and chaos. He actually coined the phrase, which is now very popular, that success is 99% failure. And basically, when he created the Honda motor car company, he started by creating a prototype for the very first Honda motorcycle. And he failed 167 times. 167 times. But he said success is 99% failure. And so often when I'm coaching people, or when I'm teaching also at the University of Western Sydney, I actually say to people, something is only a failure if you don't ask, what did I learn? What will I do differently next time? And why did I fail? And I say to students, how many of us would have 167 goes at getting something right, but believing that by doing things differently every one of the 167 times, you'll get to an end result? That concept of the journey versus the destination.
For sure, and we see that in Edison, and we see that in a lot of people who invent and persevere. Henry Ford, I think, has similar remarks. Do you think now, though, that we live in a time where our failures are made public because we have them on our profiles? If we mess up, it's going to be posted, and that's permanent. Are students here facing far more than we ever faced when we were at school?
Maybe not in the way that your failures will be posted, but more in the way that we control our online perceptions and the way that people see us online. So yeah, I think it maybe is a bit more of a challenge in that sense, that you're constantly trying to project an image of yourself. And you know, when I was at high school, social media didn't exist. We were still beep, 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 dialing up to the internet. You know, you didn't have to...
You had to make that sound into the phone.
Yeah. You had to get it right. It was like a password through the voice.
We were dialing a phone that didn't even have buttons.
So
We sound like massive losers, don't we?
Oh my gosh, when I was a boy, we used to have...
Yeah, but it's like you didn't have to think about how people saw you in the photos, whether you looked cool, whether you looked hot in your selfies and all that kind of thing. So
We never had that.
yeah, no. So you could just sort of
Could be a
flounder a little
dag.
bit more.
Yeah.
Except your
dad.
yearbook photo.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the one thing. You guys didn't... Yeah, I
You only
had
had to look sharp
Yeah.
once a year, that's right.
once a year.
And we still look daggy.
I didn't. What are you talking about?
Okay, you're the
Well, one of the things we're
cookie.
doing now, I mean, we're seeing people like Edward Snowden come up and reveal the extent to which our governments control this data, tap this data. They're burning effigies of Tony Abbott in Indonesia because our government spied on his cell phone. Is it ever right that that data, which we, not that we post online, but that we have online as private, is ever taken by a government?
Look, you know, it's obviously a very slippery slope. It's a very complex issue, but I think that there's a question that a government needs to ask and be able to answer to its people, and that is, we are doing this because of, right? And one of the things that's very, very clear that around the Edward Snowden stuff and the monitoring of the public in the United States, in Germany, in France, and also tapping the President of Indonesia's wife's phone, no one's actually been able to say, this is why we did it. And I think that's the question that needs to be answered.
Well, the nuance of that story is that this was happening in 2009, just after like 2 hotels were bombed and 3 Australians died in Jakarta. So the need to collect as much information as possible about potential terror attacks and how much the Indonesians were actually doing to reduce the risk of that happening again was in Australia's interest. It's just comes down to, I guess, how you do it and how you manage those balances, because clearly there is a need to collect some of this information, but you need to get the balance right. But then, as you're saying, James, I agree, like you need to communicate to some level, but it's so hard because they can only say so much about that information they're collecting without giving away their operations. I don't want to sound like Scott Morrison here, but you know, it's quite a hard balance.
When we acted in the efforts of security, did we actually lose, for ourselves as citizens, a little bit of liberty?
In that particular situation? No, we didn't.
Because it was others. It was
Well, that's right.
offshore.
But we might be now because our relationship with Indonesia is falling apart and they're not cooperating us on asylum seekers and potentially, you know, buying less live cattle trade and those sorts of things. So maybe eventually, yeah, we will see some reduction in our utility or our liberty, but at the time we didn't.
I'd like to expand on what James said. James, you know, was saying we need to be told why they are doing this. I'd like to suggest that it's not so much about being told why we're doing this. And by the way, I also agree with what Tom's saying about there was a need to collect that data after those bombings. I think what we have to be is honest about what we can and can't tell people. And the reason I say that is in my career and even in running my own business now, and I had an example of it this year, I do investigations into a whole range of things, including being involved in understanding the whole Skype thing and the Jedi Council thing with the Army, but I also did a really difficult investigation in a major public sector organisation. And you can't disclose all of what you know. You can't disclose all of the data you are collecting. But what I think you can disclose is that you are working in that space, the reason why you're working in that space, and then more importantly, why you can't share everything. Because there are things we cannot share, either for security reasons or to protect people's identities.
Totally, they just get so uncomfortable when they get questioned about these sorts of things by the media. But if you're right, if they could sit there and say, we need to collect this so that you're safe from terror threats.
Yeah.
We need to collect this for this, and this reason. We would love to tell you more than that, but we can't. And
James, last comment. Are we losing out
yeah,
here?
but I mean, look, I agree, but I think unless we know, so the point is that unless we know, we don't trust. Unless they're honest with us, we don't trust,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so what we see now with the National Security Organisation in the States, the National Security Agency in the States, and their overreach, and that's what it seems like to be, total overreach. People just, and Tony Abbott's refusal to comment and all these different things, what I think ends up happening is that we just then don't trust them full stop. So if they do come to us, and I think this trusting is really important, it's fragile, right? And at the moment that someone comes to you and says, okay, but now you can trust us, now we're telling you the truth, well, you have to now rebuild that trust before I can do that. So yeah, I mean, totally agree. It's a very slippery slope. It's a very complex issue. But I think if we lose that trust of our government, then we're in all sorts of trouble.
And this is not a political statement when I say I think the issue with Abbott not saying anything is exactly that. He's actually not saying anything. He's not saying yay or nay or, this is why we did it, or something as simple as, we actually can't tell you.
But he's being called on that bluff, which
Ladies
is
and
kind of funny
gentlemen,
to watch.
we have opened a couple of cans of worms, and I'm glad we did, because now is your time to open even more with our panel here. I think you'll agree. They're incredibly fluent, and would love to hear your questions. If you want to ask a question, you can text to the number in your booklets. You can use Twitter on the hashtag NYLD to ask, or you can raise your hand, old-fashioned. And our first question, old-fashioned style, comes from the aisle just up here. Yes?
Hello, my name is Irene Cassis from Newcastle High School, and my question is based on your cultural backgrounds. I happen to be Greek, just like Mr. Vanidaki, and would like to know what makes foreign students so successful.
So people from dual backgrounds, what makes foreign students so successful?
Oh, wow. Look, I think there's certain cultural practices that happen. I think, I can talk from my experience, and probably, some of what Tom said before is I grew up in an incredibly working class background, and my parents saw university as the one pathway for security and success. So I think that's definitely one of those issues. I think the other issue is there is something about resilience in negotiating dual identities and trying to figure out who you are. And I think it's really hard as you're growing up to have two identities, being Greek and Australian or Indian and Australian. But I think that's also, in the longer term, can be something that's really, really positive.
Our next question comes to us from just over here on the other side of the room. Yes?
Hey guys, Emmanuel Quincy from Humbish Boys High School. I have a question for Avril. You're talking about the apartheid in South Africa, right? My question is, how do we overcome the fact that society tends to neglect the people that are suffering from poverty and all that? In fighting for their freedom and for their right, how do we overcome the perspective of the people that tend to neglect them?
It's an interesting question. How do we overcome, if people are fighting for the rights of people, as you were, how do we overcome those that preserve inequality?
Look, that is an excellent question, and I've always believed that, unfortunately, power often sits with people who have a vested interest in protecting their position of power. And I think at the end of the day, when people say there's no point, in that case when it was happening to me, there's no point protesting or trying to change things because you're only one person. And there's a wonderful quote by a woman called Margaret Mead who said, every historical change of significance in history was brought about by one person who cared enough. And if you think about people like Nelson Mandela, he was willing to go to prison for 27 years. People like Mahatma Gandhi, he was willing to be persecuted. And I think that what we've got to do is we have to find ways of supporting people who are willing to be courageous enough to do something different. And I'll willingly tell my story because I am estranged from most of my family for my political beliefs and because I came to Australia. And basically I came here because I believed that I could probably make more of a difference here by working around the issues of equality, and why I'm so excited about working with the Chief of Army and working with mining companies who are trying to do things in Africa and showing them how to do it differently. And so I think that what you've got to do is find that space where you can support people, but recognise that it does take a long time. You know, I've been doing this for 30 years, and sometimes I still think, you know, why are we taking so long to change things? So it's a long answer, but I think it's not a simple answer.
Yeah, it's a great answer. A question from up the back, yes.
Hi, my name's Kevin from Fairvale High School. I'd just like to ask Tom, how do you balance your opinion to being an impartial journalist?
Basically by applying the same amount of challenge to every person that comes on the show, and whether that's someone that fits with my own personal values or not, I see a sort of an opportunity and almost a sport in like hammering them as hard as possible with polite, you know, questions and respect and warmth. And that's kind of the trick of what I do, is like, you know, bringing people in, making them feel really welcome, but knowing that they're going to get a robust, challenging set of questions. And so actually even, if someone says something on the talkback line that doesn't make sense, I'll go them over it. And I'll apply that same kind of approach to a Liberal or a Labor or a Greens politician that comes on the show.
We want to thank James, we want to thank Lorenzo, Azy, and Jessica from Strathfield South for running the mics. We have time just for one last question, and that comes to us from just over here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Thea Stevenson from Smithsville High School, and I just wanted to ask, how and where do you find inspiration in your life? And in that inspiration, how do you apply it in both your day-to-day life, and when things get tough, how do you sort of keep going with it?
Time for just a quick response here.
Well, I think you just find inspiration in the everyday people that you meet. I think what you do is you look for little things you can do, kind of like what Avril said, little things that we can do. I think change begins with a drop in the ocean. It's like a ripple effect, yeah? And I think you find inspiration of people that are doing everyday things, little things. And yeah, and I think that's one of the places I find inspiration.
I read an enormous amount, and there's lots of people I respect, like Dan Millman and Robin Sharma, people who challenge you to be better than you are today, tomorrow. And the second is that when I'm having a really bad day, I've got this deal with myself that you can only have one bad day at a time. So if it's a bad day, just have a bad day. Try not to be unkind to anyone. And when you go to bed that night, I say to myself, tomorrow's another day, and tomorrow's going to be a good day. And so the bad day finishes when I go to sleep, and tomorrow's the good day.
Tom, where do you find yours?
Two places. When it's from outside, it's amongst my friends and the people that I meet, and the sort of energy that they give me just through kicking around, shooting the breeze, or going out together, or more, you know, deeper, more philosophical conversations. And then I also feel that there's also a time to get inspiration from inside, which is more reflective feelings and having that little bit of calmness occasionally in my life where beautiful ideas might pop out, and I feel really excited about bringing them to life.
Well, guys, it's been fantastic. Just to say thank you from Woolware High School. We have Daniela and Rihanna coming up on the stage. You guys want to stand?
So, on behalf of all the students that are here, I just want to say thank you for telling us your own personal stories about encouragement and perseverance, and it really inspires a lot of us to persevere in our own walks and to encourage ourselves to reach our own goals. So thank you.
Guys, would you give, please, a huge round of applause to our panel, James Avril, Tom Tilley, Alvaro Henry. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, guys.